What does it mean to shape the economies of the future? To use influence not just to grow wealth, but to build systems that unlock participation, agency, and value for entire communities. In this episode of The Art of Influence, I sit down with Mo Ezeldin, head of Tokenomics at Animoca Brands. Mo is one of the sharpest minds in the future of the internet, or what they call Web3. He's a former mathematics teacher turned architect of token ecosystems, who now leads a global team designing token models for some of the most ambitious projects in blockchain technology. We cover things like what makes a sustainable token economy, why motivation trumps incentivization, and how to build trust in a world obsessed with hype. Mo also shares his story about how he lost nearly everything in the 2017 ICO craze, and how that moment of collapse became the turning point in his career. This episode isn't just for people interested in blockchain tech. If you're building anything in a fast-moving, trust-challenged environment, whether it's a startup, creative community, or a public movement, Mo's insights will help you think more clearly about structure, psychology, and long-term value. If you're building influence in your world, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to the show right now and never miss an episode. Let's dive in. Mo, first of all, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and taking the time out of this crazy week, which is Consensus 2025. Let's start with you, like Mohammed Ezeldin. What brought you into this space, and tell me about your background.
Absolutely. So I come from humble beginnings. Like I studied mathematics at university, went into finance, I graduated with the first class honors, went into finance, quit in my second week. And I was just like, yeah, there was the dream of retiring when you're 40, making six figures by the time you're 30. No, just the ethos was everything that I was raised to not believe in. Because I was raised with believing in community, in trying to add value. And being in finance felt very dog-eat-dog, felt very extractive. So it didn't feel like a good personality fit from that perspective. And I ended up falling back into education and doing my master's as a fallback. Like the dream was there and it popped in the second week, back at doing my master's. And post or during my master's, there was really some soul searching over what do you want to do next? And something I had an inherent maybe gift or something I was just good at was actually breaking down complex constructs and simplifying it and explaining it to my peers. So I remember when I was at uni and there was something people didn't understand, I'd be one of the people that people would come and ask, right, we know you've got the answer, but how? And then the people who genuinely wanted to understand the reasonings behind it. So a few friends are like, why don't you look at teaching? We think you'd make a great teacher. And I was like, yeah, the money in teaching isn't that good, but you know what? I can vibe with that because the holidays are great, but also that there was more meaning to life from that perspective. So then I studied a master's in education, became a high school teacher in the UK, and I did that for the best part of a decade. But during that journey in 2017, a friend sent me the Bitcoin white paper, and they're like, read this, I think you'll enjoy it. He was right. I enjoyed it because the way the problem Bitcoin solved was presented to me was this notion of a Byzantine general's problem. It was this very simple concept back in the days before technology, before phones, that the Byzantine army had, and it was a consistent challenge just in warfare at the time, that if you surround the castle, how can you send a message to each of the generals on either side of the castle and receive a message back confirming if we're attacking at dawn, for example. And Bitcoin solved that because you were able to send and receive messages in a trustless environment, but it would be trusted. But just take messaging out and plug in value. And for me, that was just like being a mathematician, seeing that white paper and the simplicity of the maths behind it. I got excited, but I also very quickly discovered ICOs. And I was like, wait, you put in X and it turns into 10X. This is great. And very quickly forgot about fundamentals, thought, listen, I can make a lot of money quickly. Started dabbling with smaller amounts and they grew. And then I went all in. And I sort of went all in around November, December time, 2017. So just as it was starting to peak, pure euphoria, I turned into one of these Lambo guys and We're going to
late
the
nights,
moon.
no sleep,
Yeah, exactly.
just grinding. Yeah.
I'm gonna skip multiple steps in one go. Yeah, it didn't end well. And I was probably worst point. I was down 97% on my portfolio. I was overexposed to altcoins, to shitcoins. I was actually using Bitcoin and Ethereum as an on-ramp into some of these like pre-sales or ICOs and private sales as they were called back then. But being a teacher, you're taught to be reflective. So I sat there and I reflected as to why have I lost this money? I was recently married at the time, had the first kid on the way. That was my mortgage money, and it's just like, okay, you've messed up. Why? And that's where I discovered, outside of like the rug pulls and the scams and the bad actors, there was an inherent failure or inherent misunderstanding around what tokenomics or what a sustainable token economy looks like, because projects at the time were raising ridiculous sums of money, selling large amounts of the token supply, and utility wasn't even a buzzword back then. It was just pure hype driven by the cabal or the KOLs, if you like. So that's sort of like a quick background and an intro into how I got into crypto, maybe how I discovered tokenomics.
That's awesome. It's amazing how that mirrors, my story personally in getting in, but I'm sure it's replicated across the whole space, is that if you're a multi-cycler, you have to go through those learning moments because it is so euphoric. You convince yourself that this is the thing that's going to build my wealth. And like, not even just from a quick flip, the kind of trader point of view, but like genuinely long-term for your family, for your career. You do get in that sense of like, yes, this is it. This is the thing that's going to.
I know what I'm doing.
I know what I'm doing.
Code,
Yeah,
I've got
yeah.
this.
And then
I'm
like
on
a
top of the
couple of
world.
clicks here and there, and next minute, So yeah, I'm sorry that happened, but
I'm not
seeing. Yeah,
I'm everything happens in life for a reason. It's something I'm a firm believer of. And if that hadn't have happened, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm very happy it happened. At the time I wasn't. I can assure you that much. But again, hindsight is 2020 from that perspective. And I think the other thing that maybe saved me from my sanity as well is I was still a teacher at the time. I was still very embedded into education. I left teaching in 21, but sort of like between 2018 to 21 is when I started refining my skills specific to token economics. Being a mathematician, I'm a problem solver, first and foremost, but being an educator and then sort of working up through the progression and career of being an educator, you learn a lot. And some of my biggest learnings outside of like how to manage people were how can you construct a learning environment where you can optimize learning based on a number of different constraints. And when we think about token economics, if we take away the economics and the mathematics, it's an ecosystem of many different moving parts. And how can you get these moving parts to work cohesively together? Then how can you optimize for that? So I had a lot of the underlying skill sets, if it was soft or hard skills needed, to come into problem solving in an intuitive way that was also being done very differently, because a lot of other experts in the space had come from an outright fintech or a financial background. So for them, it was purely in the spreadsheets, and there wasn't that human
factor, right?
100%.
Yeah. As Charlie Munger says, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
That's like what we're designing ultimately.
Exactly. And as humans are very complex creatures, very simple creatures at the same time. So how do you plan thinking how people are going to interact or react to something, when in reality, there is no one size fits all for human behavior? But then you can also argue there is a one size fits all, as we've seen, or maybe like two-party politics and the way people vote, or when it comes to sports and the pure bifurcation and tribalism that exists there. But as humans, we're very complex because we have different things at different moments in our lives that have meaning to us. And it's very difficult to find a weighting around when something is more important to you than something else. And this is outside of crypto. This is just, is it my career? Is it my family? Am I more worried about the size of the number of my account, how big my friendship group is, how many followers I have on social media? Or am I worried about just being content, having good health, having a small inner circle that I can trust, and everything in between? So I feel just as humans, we go through different revolutions, or when I say revolutions, more the case of internal revolutions of fighting against the status quo sometimes, and trying to better ourselves. But then in crypto and everything is super financialized, it just everything is out the window, because you sometimes want to be a better person, but again, money is a big driver for a lot of people, especially in today's day and age.
I just wanted to pause and point out that Mo's approach to influence is really unique. He's thinking about behavior, values, and reputation. And that's why his personal influence doesn't just come from his role at Animoca, it comes from years of earned trust in this digital ecosystem we all live in. If you're listening to this and wondering how you show up with influence in your space and get a return on the effort that you're putting into content creation on your socials or on your media channels, I want to invite you to check out my influence audit. It's something I created for founders, creatives, and leaders who want to better understand their personal leverage, where your story lands, how your content performs, and what moves you can make next to grow your impact. You can find it at kadegreenland.com/the-influence-audit. All right, back to the conversation. There's that saying, economies of scale when it comes to business and, that optimization, but it's really, it's economies at scale. Like, how do we create micro economies around what we're doing that ticks the boxes of the right kinds of incentives for people within that community to create a flywheel of engagement and interest that goes beyond token price and ties into social status, ties into hype, community, passion. All of those elements come to play. And I'd love to go deeper on how tokenomics underpins that and your perspective on, let's start off with, what makes really great tokenomics in your perspective, but then also what the things that you've seen that completely undermine and unravel projects from a tokenomics perspective.
It's interesting because what we have in Web3 are economies to scale, because we're not at scale to begin with. And you've mentioned there's a microeconomy to begin with, and you have a very different user base at the start. And in general, unfortunately, what we've seen is a large number of users in the space are focused purely on the financialization aspect, which makes it difficult, because if it's purely financially driven, it becomes about incentivization versus motivation. Yet when we look at where we have maybe a social media app or a marketplace like an eBay or an Amazon, people are using these because it solves problems for them and is a motivation for me to use something versus an incentivization for me to use something. And that there's been numerous studies shown that, and this will link back to the question you've asked, that if someone is motivated to do something, you replace the motivation with an incentive, and then you remove the incentive, the motivation is gone. So actually, by focusing purely on the incentive cycle, we're removing any motivation. So all of a sudden, we have all of the farmers that we've seen where it's just like, all right, it doesn't make a difference if I enjoy gaming, if I enjoy DeFi, it doesn't make a difference what the underlying enjoyment or motivation factor is. If there's money to be made, that will always trump the motivation. And I feel that's something we've gotten wrong in the space. And it's, I mean, there's so many angles to attack this from. Like, you asked what's gone wrong, and I feel exchanges are a big problem. So this is a controversial view but it's something that I've seen time and again. The exchanges are extractive.
Yep.
What they fundamentally want is an active user base. They want people to trade so they can make money off of the fees. It's a business model that works. But in doing so, they have very stringent requirements of these are metrics that a community needs to have in terms of number of Twitter followers, number of people in the Discord. If there's an NFT, having a certain amount of people holding the NFT, and the NFT price has to be at a certain point, amongst a host of other things they look into. But fundamentally, the way this is translated is for a project to hit the minimum thresholds, they start all of the airdrop farming. Follow, retweet, join our Discord, do this, do that. So you have
all this superficial incentives just to click through
and then you have projects who have a user base or a community. That's not really a community, because once the airdrop takes place, what happens? They disappear, they dump, and then they're onto the next onto the next project. And I akin it to, I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings. So in the third film, where I think it's the army of the undead, and it comes in and it just kills everyone. For me, that's what the farmers are like. They come in and it's like, done. You get listed and then dump, and they're gone, and they just vanish like that onto the next project or
You're left
protocol.
kind of like broken on the floor, going, "What just happened
What's
to my
going
project?"
on? And then exchanges will ask for different deposits. They'll ask for, in some instances, advisory tokens. So they become very extractive. So you're starting from a point of extraction. And we think about Web3. Web3 in its true form, we talk about decentralization. It's actually about how can you add value. So when we talk about like Bitcoin and the consensus mechanism around Bitcoin, it's proof of work. And for me, what a lot of these mechanisms should be underpinned by is some kind of proof of valuable work, by you adding value to an ecosystem. So it's actually about how can we be, I don't use the word incentivized because we've spoken about the negative connotations around that, but how can you motivate people to want to add value so an ecosystem can grow versus just being value extractors? But then you're starting off from an extraction point of view. So if start as you mean to go on, and if the first step is a step in the wrong direction, then you're just going to compound negatively over time. So maybe I'll pause there because I felt like I've gone off on a tangent.
I love though that we've spoken about tokenomics for 10 minutes and you haven't mentioned allocations, distributions, vesting schedules, all the rest.
It's important, but it's like tokenomics is an onion. And I mentioned that outside of that, it makes you cry. There are also multiple different layers to it as well. And I actually got that analogy. I've got 2 young kids, so I've seen my
Shrekonomics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shrekonomics through and through. Like an ogre is like an onion. When I heard that, I'm like, I'm using that. I'm using that. So there's different layers too. And what the majority of people are most familiar with, like it is the pie chart, is the allocations, is the distributions. And it's actually very important to get your allocation and distribution right from the get-go. Distribution more so, because your allocations, sometimes you can change them, but most often than not, you cannot change the initial distribution once that's taken place. And if you're unlocking a number of tokens, let's say, to inside the allocations, by insider allocations, I mean, if it's a team, if it's investors, if it's advisors, they're likely going to sell. And if you also have the airdrop farming aspect and you're giving a large amount of airdrop to the community and their value extractors, they're also likely to sell. And we talk about token economics, it's supply and demand fundamentally. Where's the demand coming from? And unfortunately, what we've seen is the demand outside of this, like previous cycles, was based on hype. This cycle, the retail has wisened up to the hype. So no one's buying, no one wants to be anyone else's exit liquidity. So if there's nothing to do with the token at TGE, and it's clear that all of these insiders are being unlocked, no one's going to touch it. Even if I believe in the ecosystem, I'll wait for people to sell, I'll wait for the price to bottom out, and then I'll buy. But crypto is also an attention economy. And a token that's gone like that and is down over 90% isn't really going to get many people's attention when there's a new shiny object over here that's just pumped 700% or 1300%. I'm more interested in that. And that we've sort of seen the rise of meme coins and fair launch as well. And fair launch isn't fair launch. It's fair launch in theory, not in practice, because I think what we've seen just since memes have really kicked off on Solana is your insiders, your cabals, your snipers. So these stories of people turning 5K into $1 million, they might be true, but how many genuine people who are not part of one of these aforementioned groups has actually done that? Not many. Not many at all. And that becomes zero sum. Yet we can do so much more. And so coming back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of like having a micro economy and an economy to scale, you need to seed your ecosystem with the right user behaviors. And that's where incentives can come in. But again, be wary of incentives versus motivation. If you can bring in a user who's motivated to be in your ecosystem, then the retention is much likely a lot higher. And we see that in let's say in Web2, that if I'm an Amazon user, I'm not incentivized to go and buy off of Amazon. I'm actually paying my monthly subscription for Prime to get free delivery, or maybe to get access to Amazon Prime so I can actually watch stuff. but there's no incentive for me from that perspective. I'm not being given cashbacks. I'm not being given any financial value back. The value I'm getting is ease or access.
Yeah, that's what you're paying. You're literally buying that time or that
100%. I'm spending money as opposed to spending time to earn money.
Yeah.
What was the other? Sports and gaming is a big one, and sports, because there's so much extraction that happens. Like I'm a massive football fan. And for those Americans, we're not talking about the football with your hands. It's called football for a reason. Like you have to use your foot. But anyway,
that aside,
that aside, we see FIFA as the biggest football game that exists. So it was recently rebranded to EA FC. Every year there's a new game. So all of the money you've spent in game, all of the assets that you've brought, you have no ownership over these assets.
Yes. All that time grinding away.
All that time grinding, all that reputation you built up, start from scratch the following season. But people are happy to spend to buy the game and then spend in-game to try and win or to try and improve the likelihood of getting good players. So when they're playing in tournaments, they can actually win because they're motivated to do so, because of the social element around it. Not because I'm going to earn $10 or $15 or maybe even a few $100s from some kind of airdrop. So that's where the motivation, we've lost that in Web3.
There's a big, the number of huge case studies that we can look at. I'd love to, from your position as head tokenomics at Animoca, you tapped into not only the next wave, but also obviously like the history of the space for a big period of time. There's a number of projects obviously you're working with now. You probably can't go into specifics, but are there, I guess, examples that stand out to you as, say, the gold standard or things that they've done really well? Are there also examples that have really stuffed it up, or at the least it was the tokenomics that pulled the rug out from under them?
So I mean, the best place to start is with Bitcoin. Obviously Bitcoin started in an unconventional way in comparison. There was no VC funding. It was your cypherpunks back in the day. They wanted something different. It was a rejection of the financial crisis. How can we create trust in a trustless environment? It was always meant to be a currency in its early days, and it's evolved into digital gold. But there is consensus that Bitcoin is number one, and you see that in the price that it's at. You see that in the percentage of the overall market cap in crypto that sits in Bitcoin is around 55%. So 55% of all money in crypto is in Bitcoin. That's no mean feat, if you see what I mean.
It's no accident.
It's no accident at all. But again, it is the OG. It's the godfather, if you like, of cryptocurrency. So the tokenomics around Bitcoin, I think it's something that's very easy to understand. I mine and I get reward, and every 4 years that reward goes down. So the rewards become deflationary over time, which increases the price. And you've sort of seen the cyclical motion of Bitcoin, that whenever a halving happens within the next 12 months, there is a bull market that kicks off. And even in 2025 today, we're sort of the bull market's slowed or cooled down a bit, but
taking a breather.
Taking a breather. There's always those pullbacks once we sort of transition from one meta into another. So Bitcoin is the obvious one. I think another tokenomics that I think is interesting, or the evolution of tokenomics, and maybe I'll touch on that before going into another example. When we think of the allocation, the distribution, the utility, we think of it as being finite, or we think of it as being once the white paper is out, that's it, we're done. And it's quite the opposite, because we agreed it's a microeconomy we're starting with, and we have to scale it over time. And
so things change.
Yeah. So you have to be dynamic. And once a token is live, that's actually the hard work. I akin TGE once a token goes live as childbirth. My wife hates it when I use this comment, but it's when a child is born, you need to give it as much care and attention. And being a father, I know that when we had our firstborn, I was getting paranoid. Like, is it breathing in the middle of the night?
Totally.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, does it need a change? Does it need to be fed? Why is it quiet? Why has it been crying for so long? A token's the same. It needs that TLC, that care, that attention.
You're watching that chart anxiously, like looking at buys and sells, and yeah.
But that's exactly it. But if I'm just focused on the financial aspect, as opposed to trying to build a community around it, trying to focus around the utility, trying to focus on product market fit, and products change, there are pivots, metas change, we forget we're still in a very innovative space, and some of the innovations from 2 or 3 years ago are outdated today, and we have new innovations coming out. So you have to always be on top of your token economy. And that sort of leads me into a like Curve Finance in terms of DeFi. They were the first to have their model and then to iterate and improve upon their model with the bribing functionality and locking up tokens for longer. But again, it's outright around monetization, purely around how can we financialize and make money and lock people up for a longer of time. It's DeFi after all. But what we haven't seen is some of the GameFi projects. Like we had Axie launch, and I'm a big fan of Axie. And there was a lot of learnings for Axie, especially around the inflation of the currency. But we also need mistakes to learn. And while Axie got a lot of stick, if Axie didn't go where it went through, we wouldn't have had play to earn, for example. We wouldn't have Ronin Chain today because they realized some of the challenges of launching on another chain, losing out on the commercials going to that chain versus having their own chain that's gaming specific. And then I think Pixels launched on there recently as well. Pixels had product market fit. I know Luke is working very hard on how can we incentivize people to pay, but also be rewarded. So you get a positive feedback loop from there. And he's really working hard to crack play to earn gaming. So again, it's everything comes in peaks and troughs or in waves. And it's how can you iterate on what was before. Hyperliquid is one that I think is a very interesting one because they had product market fit, launched a token, and then we saw the token price go from strength to strength. Because again, it's around trading. It's giving you that SEX centralized exchange feeling, but it's actually a DEX. And again, the business model is simple. You get discount on fees. They have an auction mechanic to get new tokens listed, but they had product market fit before launching a token. Versus here is our dreams of what we want to achieve. Let's launch a token. Everyone dumps. There's no retention mechanism, and then you've got a group of really good founders building a product, and then a token is a product within itself. But
it's distracting from it and it's undermining. Yeah.
And once you have a live economy, like I said, it's you can't return a baby. You know what I mean? They had no refunds allowed. But like, and so coming back to like another aspect, the distribution, like airdrops are super important because airdrops give you decentralization. They allow for you to have a large user base, and fundamentally that can be your marketing spend. I mean, what's the purpose of a lot of the big Web2 companies, or just Web2 companies having a big marketing budget is to onboard users. The beauty of Web3 is that you're not a consumer, you're a community member, you have a voice, and that's given rise to DAOs, and we're seeing the evolution of DAOs over time. So I was lucky enough to work on ApeCoin and an ApeCoin DAO prior to launch. That was 3 years ago now. So the DAO has like the governance around the DAO is outdated. So I'd stepped back in as special counsel on ApeCoin DAO. I was voted in July of 2024 with a very simple mandate to update governance. Governance is in need of a revamp, and we had the AIP pass and I think 3 weeks ago now, and it's looking at what's the key takeaways from the governance revamp. There's a lot of complexities in there, but it's looking at how we can embed centralized and decentralized actors to work together in a way, because what I think there's been a stark realization that without reputation being at stake, people vote. And I mean, people vote anyway, but there's no blowback to the way you're voting. And sometimes in a bear market, we see a peak in DAOs, and we see a peak in the engagement around DAOs because there's less distractions. But as soon as the bull market comes again, what's the new shiny thing that's going to make money? And let me start following the trends. And so we see less engagement in DAOs, which is why you need some kind of centralized. When I say centralized, I mean having a team that you can hold to account based on a mandate,
and who have it at the top of their priority list day in, day out to push it, and not kind of casually coming in and
doing it for a period of time, and then let me go chase the next trend. So it's a pseudo bicameral structure.
It's really like looking at the board, the DAO, the members as the board that come in like a board, and then they'll have a meeting every few months or whatever. make some big strategic decisions, put operators in place to execute on that and hold accountable to that, you know.
100%. And the way we did it with ApeCoin DAO is that there'll be an executive director. The naming might change from now, but fundamentally they are given a chunk of the treasury, which the community can claw back. And it's on them with the mandate that they have to then grow a team and go out and grow the value of ApeCoin, grow the dApps or Web2 businesses that are coming in to build on ApeChain. So there's accountability, and I feel there isn't enough accountability in the space because your reputation is at stake. You have something to lose, and we're also seeing a rise in reputation layers as well. So Mochaverse is something that we worked very closely on. And when we talk about the distribution of the token, the distribution went to the NFT holders, but it was done in a gamified way. We wanted to identify who was a farmer, but also who was in it for the long run. So as opposed to just getting an airdrop and everything is unlocked at TGE, you had a choice. I can choose to claim my airdrop now, and I sort of lose any bonus airdrop I can get, or I can claim later with a bonus. The caveat was that if I'm claiming now, I might be getting more, slightly more now, but in the long term, I'm getting less. And we can also identify those wallets holding those NFTs and those tokens as someone who's maybe, who can add less value over time. So there's less emphasis on retention around them and actually focus on the core community who have showcased that I'm happy to claim later. They still got some of their airdrop up front. We wanted the community to have a win. So even if you're selling some, that's fine, but we had staking, or we had gamified staking. And the way the staking worked is I stake my NFTs, I stake my tokens, so fundamentally reducing supply. But why would someone do that? Well, they're generating staking power, and that then gives you access to different partners who are launching their tokens. So now I have other ways, again, thinking around the financialization aspect. I can get access to these tokens, but I still have to do things to get access to these tokens. So you created a retention mechanism which locked up some of supply, both on the token side and on the NFT side, and gave you an engagement mechanic to onboard partners from the Animoca ecosystem through Mochaverse to then keep people engaged and act as a user acquisition funnel into these different ecosystems. So that's something, again, we spoke about token economies being live and in motion. So that's one we're closely monitoring as well. But so far, the chart did not go like that. It's actually been more up than down.
It's found that.
And it's found itself within that. And this is, if we're talking about fair launch, this wasn't a fair launch token. It also didn't launch at a crazy valuation. We see some tokens launching at $1 billion and then sort of dying over time, if that makes it like a slow and painful death. So it's, being a mathematician, it's hypothesis testing, and this was a good, the outcome of this hypothesis testing was quite positive based on the assumptions that were made.
I can imagine you know, that meme, Always Sunny meme with the whiteboard and like that whole map, you know. I'm imagining your day-to-day is half speaking to projects and like teaching them, but then also half like deep in this world of seeing where all of these pieces fit together.
I love a whiteboard session. So when we have workshops with clients, for me, that's when I'm most in my element. Again, having been a teacher, give me a whiteboard pen, give me a whiteboard, and I'm a very happy man. Like I'm very easy to please. Because as we're having the discussion, it's like, all right, let's get everything down. And then let's start grouping together different parts. What makes sense? What do we have within the ecosystem? What can be part of the go-to-market strategy? How can we engage users to convert them into community members? And the reason I say that, if you're a user, you're fundamentally a farmer who's going to airdrop and leave. But if you're a community member, you're someone who's going to stay the course of time. And maybe using a bad example of an airdrop mechanism, I think probably one of the most recent ones was Azuki. Now, Azuki, blue chip NFT collection. I'm a holder of Azuki as well. So seeing the way the airdrop was conducted was actually, it was really sad, because you want to see other projects being a success, because that legitimizes the space even more. But what ended up happening is you had, again, a lot of the value extractors buying the NFT, knowing that there was a token airdrop coming. And once the NFT had settled at around the floor price of approximately 10 ETH, when the airdrop happened, each Azuki got approximately 5 ETH. What happened? Bloodbath. You could claim everything up front, so there was no lockup structure, no incentive mechanism to keep you locked within the ecosystem. Even though they've got a great point system or reputation system based on the different Azukis you hold, the length of time you've held for, and it's part of the narrative. That didn't play into
the actual edge, like the
I
whole.
mean, it played into the amount you got, so there was differentiation, and I can get slightly higher if I'd completed different things.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a mechanism where I can then stake my tokens to increase my reputation within.
There's
the
no
garden.
loop. They didn't close the loop.
There was
right?
no loop. It was linear.
Yeah.
It's, you have something great. Here's your airdrop. You get all of it up front, and there was nothing for people to speculate over, so to speak. There's nothing for people to stake, to do. So what happened? It just became a bloodbath. You want to see the blue chips being a success because they send a beacon of hope, and they also showcase examples of how you can do this successfully. And for us, even as for me personally, it's how can we showcase success that others can copy? Because the space is, there's a lot of copy paste.
Yeah.
Where people are copy pasting things that are not the best practices.
It's just what they've seen.
That's what they've seen. They think it works. But how can we copy paste best practices? Well, we have to see best practices in the best of projects that have mindshare. And we're not seeing that enough, unfortunately.
So practically, how do people work with you, with Animoca? Like just a way to kind of wrap up. Yeah, it's been an awesome conversation, and I can't wait for round 2. But just to leave the audience with some tangible steps that they can take, some founders, what are they reaching out to you for?
So Animoca is an ecosystem builder. Like, I feel there's a lot of confusion. People think we're a VC. People think we're a gaming company. It's like, we were a gaming company. We've evolved. We have an investment arm. But fundamentally, we have a lot of advisory as well, because we have a lot of know-how. So I lead the token advisory team, and the way we engage with projects is for projects who haven't launched a token. We come in as your co-launch, your partner to launch. We'll help with your token economics design, your ecosystem design, value accrual, go to market. Then we have other departments internally who can help with the market making, who can help with the marketing. We have treasury management as well. So for us, it's how can we give you an end-to-end solution to help you be successful? And the best part of this, we talk about incentives. To make sure we're incentive aligned, we charge in tokens. And the reason we do that, I mean, it's simple. If the token is a success, we all win. If it's not a success, we don't get to eat per se. We don't win. So that's how you get the right incentive alignment.
Yeah.
So that's been something we've been doing for a number of years. We've been fleshing out and growing different capabilities internally.
So obviously there's a standard that you have for projects that you work with. Otherwise,
absolutely. I mean, for us, it's we come in as co-designers. So there needs to be trust there, because you're working with a stakeholder, and to a certain degree, their Web3 life is in our hands. I've had the founder say that to me. It was like, my Web3 life is in your hands. I was like, well, this is why we're working together. And it's about the relationship. It's about trust. And it's also about just being open and honest. And I feel some founders, or some of my biggest pain points, is when founders don't listen to advice. The token launch goes horribly wrong, and they come back and say, what went wrong? And it's like, well, we warned you of all of these, and here's a 30-page report warning you of all of this, and here are our recommendations, and they're all in red. I don't like taking those, or I don't like having those conversations. So for us, it's how can we
I've taught you everything, but you failed the exam. So it shows promise, but lacks motivation.
But it's also because they see a hype cycle, and like, right, we want to jump on this hype cycle, whatever that hype cycle might be, and they end up forsaking the fundamentals. And there's a balance between fundamentals and between tapping into the hype. And I feel the pendulum swings too much the other way sometimes. But we have some really good founders as well who do take on board the advice, who even post-launch, we're still in contact. What can I do to improve? Pixels is a great example. So Pixels was something I work very closely with Luke on. Prior to launch, and now even post-launch, we're still conversations in terms of, again, just sharing ideas.
Well, you got to raise the child.
Exactly, you're raising the child. And it's a bit like, all right, Luke's a single dad right now to a degree, and you're just getting some friendly advice of what can I do from someone who has many children. Children being tokens. And it's
not around the world.
Exactly.
Well, it's been awesome to sit down. I know you've got a hectic week here at Consensus. I just really value your time. As I said, round 2, we have to put it on the card.
Oh, we have to.
It's been wonderful.
It has.
Thanks, man.
No, Kade, thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
I've actually, you put me in quite a zen mode having this conversation.
Yeah.
So I think I'm ready for the world now.
Great.
Let's go.
Yeah, it's been well. Let's go. That's it for an absolute masterclass with Mo Ezeldin of Animoca Brands. Mo is such a grounded way of cutting through the noise and reminding us what matters. Build for the long term, serve real needs, and never forget the humans behind that community. There was so much in this conversation, from community design and airdrop psychology to DAO governance and raising the next generation of token economies. I hope you got as much from it as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and make sure to tag me or Mo on LinkedIn. Let me know what stood out for you. And make sure you subscribe to The Art of Influence so you don't miss what's coming next. Until then, keep showing up, keep building trust, and keep crafting influence that lasts.